The morning was quiet, but the tension had been building for weeks. When the police car rolled slowly down the gravel road toward the lake, everyone knew something was wrong. This story promises a twist no one in the HOA saw coming, and it all started with a tent by the water. The man had bought the land years ago, dreaming of peace, fishing, and long weekends away from noise. The lake was private, the deed was clear, and the rules were simple. Or so he thought. Neighbors whispered, HOA emails piled up, and warnings arrived without explanation. He stayed calm, believing truth would protect him. But that calm was about to be tested. As the officers stepped out and glanced at the tent near the shore, the man realized this wasn't just about camping. It was about control, power, and how far people would go to claim what was never theirs. And this was only the beginning of a battle that would expose everything. He looked across the water, remembering why he bought this land, unaware that one phone call had already changed his future forever. The next moments would prove how fragile peace becomes when pride speaks louder than facts. And no one present was prepared for what followed. Now, the officers listened politely as the HOA president arrived, confident and rehearsed. She claimed the man was trespassing, breaking community rules, and threatening property values. This video promised a shocking truth, and the truth was hiding in plain sight. The man said little at first, letting the accusations fill the air. He simply asked the officers to wait. His voice was steady, his posture calm, as if he already knew how this would end. The HOA members watched closely, expecting a quick removal and public shame. Instead, the man walked to his truck and pulled out a worn folder. Inside was a deed, old but clear, describing boundaries, water rights, and ownership in exact detail. The officers began reading, their expressions slowly changing. The lake was not shared. It was private. And the HOA had no authority there. Silence spread across the shoreline as confidence turned into confusion. The story was no longer about a tent. It was about a life finally facing daylight. Every rule they quoted collapsed under ink and signatures that predated the HOA itself. The promise of this story tightened as the truth edged closer. What happened next would change the entire neighborhood. Now, the HOA president tried to laugh it off, but the sound felt hollow. The officers asked questions, careful and firm, while neighbors gathered at a distance. This was the moment viewers were promised, when power began to slip. The man explained how he paid taxes, maintained the lake, and followed laws long before the HOA existed. Emails, threats, and fines were revealed, each one more aggressive than the last. The officers exchanged looks. What started as a complaint now felt like misuse of authority. The HOA had called the police, but the police were no longer on their side. One officer quietly explained that filing false reports carried consequences. The president's face changed, not with anger, but fear. Around them, the lake reflected the sky, calm and unmoved by human drama. Yet beneath that calm, the foundation of the HOA was cracking. And everyone sensed that the truth was about to land hard. The promise of a twist grew heavier as neighbors realized they had been misled for years. Whispers spread, loyalty shifted, and the story moved toward an ending no one predicted. Even the wind felt still, waiting for the final words. What followed would echo far beyond the lake. Tonight, the officers made their decision quietly, but its weight was enormous. They informed the HOA president that the complaint was invalid and warned her about further actions. This was the payoff viewers waited for, but the story wasn't finished. The man was free to camp, fish, and stay as long as he wished. Yet the officers didn't leave. They asked for HOA records, meeting notes, and proof of authority. Panic spread through the board members. Years of fines, threats, and pressure suddenly felt exposed. Neighbors began questioning past decisions, wondering how many rules were built on assumption rather than law. The promise of the story sharpened as the HOA realized this moment was being documented. What felt like control now felt like collapse. The lake remained calm, but reputations were sinking fast. And the man knew the real twist was still ahead. The next step would decide the HOA's fate. Forever, weeks later, the fallout became impossible to hide. Legal notices arrived, meetings were cancelled, and silence replaced authority. This was the deeper payoff promised at the start. The deed check had triggered audits, and those audits uncovered years of overreach. Funds were misused, rules selectively enforced, and voices ignored. The man stayed mostly quiet, returning to the lake, living the peace he paid for. Meanwhile, neighbors began apologizing, admitting they followed out of fear. The HOA president resigned without explanation, leaving confusion behind. What once felt untouchable now looked fragile. The story shifted from conflict to reflection, as people realized how easily authority can drift without accountability. The promise of justice felt close, but the final outcome was still forming. And one last reveal was waiting. It came sooner expected. The official letter arrived on a quiet afternoon, sealing what rumors had started. The HOA was dissolved, stripped of authority due to documented abuse. This was the shocking twist promised from the first hook. One deed check had unraveled an entire system built on pressure and silence. The man read the letter by the lake, feeling no victory, only relief. Neighbors gathered later, not to argue, but to talk honestly for the first time. Without the HOA, they faced choices together. The lake, once a symbol of conflict, became a symbol of clarity. The story reached its emotional peak, showing how calm truth can outlast loud control. Yet one final note remained, something viewers needed to hear. This ending wasn't about winning. It was about knowing your rights, standing quietly, and letting facts speak when emotions fail. And with that understanding, the story prepared to close. The final message would leave a lasting impression. One that stayed long after the screen went dark. For everyone watching, the story closed where it began, by the lake, quiet and unchanged. What shifted was understanding. This HOA emotional story was never just about camping. It was about boundaries, patience, and the power of reading what you sign. The man didn't fight loudly. He waited, trusted facts, and let the truth arrive on its own. That choice dismantled an entire structure built on assumption. Viewers were promised a reveal, and the reveal was simple: knowledge protects peace. As the sun reflected on the water, the lessons settled in. It reminded everyone that silence is not weakness, and patience can reshape outcomes when noise fails. And that was the final twist in this unbelievable HOA story. If you loved the drama, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment sharing your thoughts. It really helps this channel grow. This lesson mattered far beyond one lake.